goes without saying, but Curt Cignetti deserves a lot of freaking credit for his first season in Indiana. Given the $15.5 million that they had to pay to buy out Tom Allen, to be in the position where Indiana hasn't won a single bowl game since 1991, Curt Cignetti definitely had a big challenge for himself. However, he in his 13 seasons previously before his first season in Indiana, he never had a losing season, whether it was at James Madison or Elon or any of his other stops. And all things considered, I mean this was definitely the Cinderella team of college football last year, and Indiana rightfully paid him. He got an 8-year contract extension back in November for $72 million. It's going to be $8 million salary with a $1 million annual bonus, which is obviously great. And I'm sure a bunch of big schools obviously went after him too. So whether you like it or not, Indiana pretty much had to pay him now. Or not, he'll actually honor that whole contract through 2032 remains to be seen. But nevertheless, I mean, he's definitely the guy right now. And you can tell from all of his interviews that he seems to love Bloomington, Indiana, and is really just the right guy for this job. And I think the one thing that he definitely deserves a lot of credit for is just instilling a culture and an identity. Because I think in the years of Tom, whether you want to talk about Tom Allen or Kevin Wilson, or, if you want to go up all the way back to the 90s, even Cam Cameron, a lot of those teams didn't really have much of an identity at all. Now, granted, a lot of those teams, particularly with Cam Cameron, Kevin Wilson, a lot of those teams had phenomenal offenses. However, it was lackluster in terms of recruiting and on the defensive side of the ball, and they really couldn't win consistently. And I think that's really going to be the big question with Indiana going into this season is, was this really a fluke, or is this something that's going to be sustainable? Because as we see it right now, obviously the big goal is going to be for Indiana to be the next powerhouse of the Big Ten. And all things considered, they definitely have the potential to do so. I mean, when you look at their 2025 class, their lone 4 stars, Byron Baldwin Jr., who I think is going to be an immediate asset to this team, somebody that I think is going to be pretty solid for them. In 2025, they're ranked number 32 in terms of overall team recruiting, which, all things considered, is pretty much on par for Indiana. I mean, I think the one thing that is definitely kind of intriguing or worth considering in terms of the recruiting front is, let's just get one thing straight here. Indiana is always going to be a tough place to recruit to some degree, right? Because at least in the Big Ten, you're facing the big dogs. I mean, you got Oregon coming at you. You got Penn State. You got Illinois, who I think could be projected to be a top 10 team this year. You got Michigan. You have USC. You got all these teams that, even Minnesota now. They're now Minnesota and Iowa. They're teams who pretty much win 9 games a season, no problem. So to have all these different factors, and now on top of that, you're pretty much competing for the same players year in and year out, it definitely makes you wonder how quickly can they do this too? Because even for them to be even in the college football playoff is really startling, all things considered. Because I mean, going to the season, I think everybody pretty much had Indiana at the very bottom of the Big Ten, and that's no knock against Curt Cignetti or his staff or anything like that. I think it was just, hey, Indiana was coming off paying Tom Allen a shitload of money. You really didn't know what you entirely had with your roster. I mean, obviously Curtis Roque deserves a ton of credit for what he did last year. I mean, Indiana averaged almost 40 yards per game offensively. I still go back and think about the Nebraska game. That was a total just certified ass whooping, winning, I think, what was it, 56-7. I mean, I remember my jaw dropped watching that game and just thinking to myself, hey, if they're going to decimate a team like Nebraska, you can bet the farm that they're going to be there in December. And needless to say, they did it. And they deserve a lot of credit for what they've done. And now that you look at this team and you say to yourself, okay, well, what specifically do they have to do in order for them to build on it and for them to be sustainable? Now, I think a couple of things that are worth noting. Obviously, Tino Sinceri, who was the co-offensive coordinator last year under Cignetti, went to UCLA and decided to be the offensive coordinator there. I think that can make a subtle difference in terms of the quarterback room. I think Sincere is probably more of a quarterback coach than he was an offensive coordinator. I mean, Mike Shanahan is just at his second year at Indiana. He also has been with Cignetti for a number of years now, with James Madison, Elon, and all those stops too. So at least the good news is there's congruity not only in some of the players that they have, but also in the coaching staff as well. So that's definitely a huge positive. Now, obviously, too, it's worth pointing out that they brought in Fernando Mendoza from the University of California to be their starting quarterback. 6'5", 225, has a really strong arm, a lot more athletic than people give him credit for, has a really good zip on the ball, and I think he's really poised. And quite frankly, he's just a guy that I see on the football field, and he just strikes me as a leader and strikes me as somebody that I think with the right weapons and the right resources around him could be a really quarterback, and somebody that I don't think really gets a lot of credit. I think if you go back and watch a lot of those UCal games, and I did a preview on UCal about a week or two ago, you should definitely check that out. But nevertheless, I think this will end up being one of the most underrated, I'll just call it signings now, in college football. And Indiana has a good amount of weapons at least on the wide receiver room too. Now, granted, they lost a couple of guys to the transfer portal and the draft and all that stuff, but they're returning a pretty solid amount of production, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And I guess anytime too you have a Curt Cignetti run offense, you know that they're going to be throwing, you know they're going to be putting up points, and you know that no matter what, they're always be putting up a fight no matter what. And I guess what excites me is what can Fernando Mendoza do with these targets, because anybody that watched UCal last year knows that he had no offensive line to support him whatsoever. So for him to be in Bloomington, for him to actually have legitimate weapons, to be in a place where they actually do care about NIL now, they actually do have the resources to support him, I think it's going to be a really fun storyline to watch. And I think as the season progresses, that's just going to be something that I would really encourage you to keep your eyes on, especially when you consider too that Indiana has to play Oregon this year and Penn State both on the road. So imagine if they pull off one of those upsets on the road. I mean, everybody already had their eyes on Indiana when they went 10-0, but you know that's going to be an even bigger story, and kind of saying to yourself, hey, are you going to have that second year drought, or are you going to be more of a one-hit wonder? I mean, the thing is too, Indiana has enough talent to the point where you can probably confidently bet that they're going to win at least 7 or 8 games. Now, do I think they're going to possibly go into the playoff again? The jury's out on that, right? I mean, we still don't know entirely what's going on yet, because I turn my attention to the defensive side of the ball now, where I think there's going to be some more question marks too. And before I get to that, I do want to point out that Indiana's defense was a lot better than people think. And I think that gets overlooked a lot, because when you look at Indiana's defense, now granted, they graduated a couple starters. You have Sean Asbury and Terry Jones Jr. in the secondary, who were a very monumental reason as to why they were the number 2 passing defense, only giving up 176 yards a game last season. And they also had 15 interceptions to only allowing 15 touchdowns too. And that's a stat that, quite frankly, I think really gets swept under the radar too. Because I think if you watch ESPN or you watch the Big Ten Network, the storyline is, hey, Curt Cignetti knows the offense side of the ball. They put up a crap load of points, and they just outduel everybody. And that's quite really not the case. And I think that definitely kind of goes back to my point before, where yes, they have continuity on the coaching staff. They are really in a lot of experienced players and talent that are going to be guys who have double-digit starts in other FBS programs as well. And, I had rattle off a couple guys here who are going to be some of their commits. You have Trevor Gibbs, who is going to be an inside linebacker. You have Casimir Hicks. You have Gabe Hill. and you also have linebacker Jacob Savage too. So at least from my vantage point, and probably rightfully so, they really prioritized a lot of their time primarily getting depth on the defense side of the ball, which for anyone in the Big Ten, it all comes down to that front seven. If you ask me, those are going to be the turning points too, especially when you have to maybe play teams like Michigan every year or Penn State, teams like that who have some of the best rushing attacks in really all of college football too. And even too, I mean, granted, you can talk about some of the maybe lack of depth that they have, and maybe you have to sit there and worry about some of the new players that are going to be on board. I mean, that's really every team, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, Curt Cignetti is doing one hell of a job, and for being ranked in the top 30 in terms of recruiting, they're doing the best that they can. Now, I think it's worth mentioning too that at least statistically speaking, Tom Allen, you can probably argue was recruiting better than Curt Cignetti. Now, granted, I mean, this is only a second class that we're seeing, but Tom Allen, for the most part, for example, when his class of 2022, they were ranked in the bottom 20. I think they were 22nd or 23rd in terms of recruiting in the country. So that's definitely something worth mentioning, and I think something to kind of keep your eyes on as this Indiana team pushes forward. But just to give a quick little preview of their schedule, I mean, you start off the year versus Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State. So those first three games are more or less a tune-up and something to kind of keep your eyes on in terms of some different offensive schemes they can be working on, and most importantly, how that defense transitions from being, one of the most dominant in all of college football, particularly on the passing side, to now having some moments where you sit there and say to yourself, hey, they're replacing some productivity. You're probably going to have to rely on some younger guys this year and hopefully not have too much of an injury bug at all too, because I know that's something that can kind of creep up on people, especially too when you're just competing for all these different players and you reach the unprecedented heights that you did last season. And, as you move forward here, there's definitely a couple games that kind of catch my eye too. And I think this 3-game stretch, at least for me, when I sit and look at this schedule, and I know it's early into the season, but this is really what's going to not quite define their season, but it's going to be very close to it. You face Illinois, fortunately at home, who I said was going to be a top 10 team. Then you're on the road to Iowa, and then you're on the road to Oregon. I mean, that's tough. That's tough for an Indiana team who, in their second season, is hoping to build off of what they did last season. And obviously, given that you're paying your head coach $9 million, you're putting a boatload of money into NIL, you're making a bunch of upgrades to your athletic facilities, that's going to be a game that we're all going to have to pay attention to, especially when you know that Oregon's one of the best teams in the country, and that's going to be a primetime game. And in primetime moments like that, for the most part, Indiana has showed up and came up to play. And I think that's really what we're going to see in terms of how good is Fernando Mendoza. Now that he has those weapons around him, he has a solid rushing attack behind him. I think that's to me going to be the real storyline in all this as well. And even moving down the line a little bit, I mean, you have Michigan State, you play UCLA, you're on the road with Maryland and Penn State, and then you finish the year on the road versus Purdue. So, necessarily a terrible schedule. I mean, it sucks that you have to travel on the road to Oregon and Penn State. That's always going to be challenging no matter what. But you can this schedule really, you can really navigate this. I mean, you can probably afford a loss to Illinois or Iowa and not be the end of the world. But all things considered, you should be probably favored to win the majority of these games. Even if they slip up and lose to a UCLA or Maryland or something, it's not unreasonable to think that they can win 9-10 games again this year.